It was already night when I drove up to my house, but my attention was attracted by a police car that was parked in the driveway next to my house and my wife's car. I was scared at first, because what could happen if I was away from home for only 3 hours? I decided to find out what's the matter. I'm Michael Johansson, but you can call me Mike. I tied the knot with Linda Thompson half a year after leaving the Navy. Leveraging my experience from the Navy's engine rooms, I landed a job servicing tugboats on the Mississippi River. A decade down the line, we're proud parents of 2 boys, still residing in a modest rented house. Linda, despite the challenges, finds fulfillment teaching 8th grade, a profession I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Yet, Linda's passion for it shines through. During the summer, she enrolled in a public school art class at the university to maintain her teaching credentials. The university, located in Jackson, is a 40-mile commute from our place. Linda didn't mind the 50-minute commute each way, as it was only for a 6-week duration. Her class convened on Tuesdays and Thursdays before lunch, followed by a 2-hour lab session at 2 o'clock. One day, while enjoying her sandwich in the student union, Linda was approached by a policeman. Linda Thompson, right? Yes, but it's Johansson now. Oh, okay. I remember you from high school. That was what, about 15 years ago? You were quite stunning back then. And I must say, you haven't changed a bit. Well, thank you, although I might question your eyesight. Of course I remember you. Frank Bowman, right? You used to play football and hang out with Roger Millsap. Mind if I join you for lunch? Are you a student here too? Yes, I am. I'm taking a class during the summer session. I see you're a policeman in Vicksburg. That's where we live too. And so, the unexpected encounter unfolded. It was Christmas, and, as we had done for the past decade of our marriage, we were at Linda's family home in Woodville, Louisiana. Each year, Santa Claus made his visit to Grandma's house for our 2 sons, aged 7 and 2. But he also made a stop at our house, so our boys were eager to return home after the holiday. All the significant gifts, like bicycles, awaited them there. On this particular Christmas day, Linda seemed engrossed in hushed conversations with her sisters, Brenda and Shirley. I couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized with odd glances, and they quickly averted their eyes when they caught mine. The disapproving glare from my mother-in-law was nothing new. She had made her lack of fondness for me evident since the day I proposed to her daughter. After dinner, my wife's elder brother, Lenny, suggested we relax on the back porch for a bit. He handed me a beer and said, "We should have a chat." "Mike, Linda has been telling her sisters that you've been drinking excessively and physically abusing her. Is that true?" "Lenny, I haven't touched alcohol since my Navy days, and I've never laid a hand on Linda." And it was true. I never would. "Where is she getting these ideas?" "I'm not sure. I never thought you were capable of such things, but stay vigilant. Something's not right, and I don't understand why she's behaving like this." I recall back in high school, she wanted to break up with Roger Millsap to go to prom with Pat Franklin, the quarterback. To avoid looking bad, she fabricated stories about Roger, claiming he was cheating on her. By the time she was done, no girl would go near Roger. "Lenny, I'm at a loss. I don't know where this is coming from or where it's headed." After that, we shifted to football talk, discussing our Super Bowl picks, and finished our beers. The day following Christmas is known as Boxing Day for reasons unknown, and by noon we had bid our farewells, snapped photos with everyone, and had our own pictures taken too, before embarking on our 2-hour journey home. There wasn't much conversation between us. The boys were happily occupied with their new toys in the back seat. I didn't bring up what her brother had mentioned, and she never discussed what she had told her sisters. By late afternoon, we arrived home. I unloaded the car, and the boys rushed inside to see what Santa Claus had left for them. Our dinner consisted of turkey sandwiches and other leftovers from our Christmas meal at her mother's house. After a few more hours of play, the boys reluctantly went to bed. It was after the children were asleep that she dropped the bombshell. "Mike, we need to talk." I was seated at the kitchen table, but I suspected there wouldn't be much talking. "I want you to leave. You need to move out tonight." I simply replied, "Okay," and began packing a bag. Perhaps I should have protested more, demanded an explanation, but I felt at a loss. By 9 o'clock, I was out the door. I packed what I could into a couple of duffel bags, taking what I deemed necessary and leaving behind what I could do without. I left without saying goodbye, expressing any sentiments, or uttering a word. I couldn't say I felt upset or surprised. There wasn't this sense of emptiness in my chest or that my life had reached its end. Maybe those feelings would hit me later. But at that moment, I was just bewildered. I figured if I gave her some space, she might come around in a day or two. I headed to the Royal Arms Motel off the highway and booked a room for the night. It didn't register much then, but I noticed a city police car slowly patrolling the parking lot behind my truck. After carrying my bags into the room, I surveyed the reality of my situation. 4 walls, a bathroom, a bed, and a cheap TV. I decided to grab some beer and snacks from the convenience store. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, an impulse. I hadn't planned on driving by the house. In my mind, I had left and had no intention of turning back. Yet, there I was in my truck, cruising around and admiring Christmas lights, until I found myself in front of our house, now hers. That's when I noticed the police car parked in the driveway. My immediate concern was whether something was wrong and if Linda and the kids were safe. When I got out of my truck and went to the garage door, I suddenly noticed that the lights were off in the house. Shouldn't there be some kind of lighting if the police came on official business? I carefully unlocked the door and entered the kitchen. Heading into the living room, I realized that the only light source was a faint glow coming from the bedroom, probably from the bedside lamp. I held my breath, trying to move as quietly as possible. The pounding of my own heart echoed in my ears as I walked slowly down the hallway until I heard snatches of my wife's voice. "Frank, come on quickly," she exclaimed. It struck me that in the 10 years of our marriage, she had never spoken to me in such a manner during our intimacy. She was always more passive, just lay there, and accepted what was happening. When I looked out from behind the slightly open bedroom door, I saw the broad back of a burly policeman who was with my wife. Suddenly, clarity dawned on me. Well, it's not completely clear, but at least I understood why she insisted that I leave the house. She treated me like a small child whose parents ask him to suddenly go out for a walk so that his parents can do important things. I realized that I was her last Roger Millsap. She made up lies about me just to trade me for her new lover. I was no longer indifferent. Slowly moving away from the door, I returned to the kitchen, overcome by emotions I had not experienced before, primarily anger. The light from the lantern from the courtyard penetrated through the kitchen windows, illuminating the room as if I had turned on the overhead light. I noticed a police uniform shirt hanging on a kitchen chair and a gun belt. The badge on the shirt had Frank Bowman's name written on it. Looking into the living room, I noticed a pair of shoes and his trousers by the sofa. There were 2 bottles of Budweiser on the coffee table. This jerk not only stole my wife, but also dared to drink my beer. I assumed they started with a little celebration. I retrieved the Colt .38 police special revolver from his holster, pondering my options. At first, I had the idea to put an end to the deception right here and now. However, the prospect of spending my days behind bars swiftly deterred me. Besides, the unfaithful woman wasn't worth the trouble. Another plan began to form in my head. If she's done with me as her husband, then I'll do with her as my wife. I took 6 bullets out of the revolver and carefully laid them out on the table. Tucking the gun into my belt, I took his badge and name tag from him before leaving as quietly as I had come. I had no intention of interrupting them in my own bed, in my own bedroom, in my own house. At least because he was clearly physically stronger than me, and since he is a policeman, I may have problems if I go for a direct collision. Outside, I used the blade of my pocket knife to remove the valve rods from all 4 tires of a police car parked in my driveway. As an additional touch, I did the same with my wife's car, throwing the rods onto the lawn. Good luck finding them in the dark, asshole. I couldn't help but enjoy the thought of how he would explain this predicament to his sergeant. I drove straight to Jimmy's house in Columbia Hills. Jimmy Hankins and I go way back, all the way to our days playing on the same Little League team as kids. While Jimmy pursued a career in law, I ended up becoming a diesel mechanic. Despite the late hour, closer to 2 in the morning, Jimmy welcomed me into his kitchen, brewed some coffee, and listened intently as I recounted the entire situation. Jimmy, I'm leaving town, and I'm filing for divorce from Linda. Whatever assets there are, she can have them, though there isn't much to speak of. The house is a rental, and the car is over 10 years old. Actually, my pickup is closer to 20. We're living paycheck to paycheck, with no savings, no 401k, no investments, no property, and no inheritance. Once I secure a new job, I'll send Linda $1,000 a month for child support, but I won't be paying any alimony. Linda is a teacher and can support herself. In fact, she earns more than I do. Jimmy retrieved some paperwork from his home office, including a power of attorney, for me to sign. As I prepared to leave, I handed Jimmy a package. You might want to return this to the police department, or perhaps pass it along to the police chief or a judge. The package contained Dickwad's gun and badge. Before tying the knot with Linda, I spent 4 years serving in the Navy. I had hoped to explore the world, but my experience mainly revolved around the engine room of a fleet replenishment ship, essentially a cargo vessel tasked with resupplying ships at sea. It was there that I honed my knowledge of marine diesel engines, learning from the skilled merchant marine crew. Following my naval stint, I transitioned to a job servicing towboats along the Mississippi River, stationed in Vicksburg and Natchez, where I've been for the past decade. Now I find myself leaving behind my unfaithful wife and setting sail for the port of Houston. While it pains me to part from my children, I can no longer endure life with their mother. Staying would only lead to a bitter divorce, fracturing the family, with her likely gaining custody despite her deceitful nature. Securing employment became my top priority. After settling into a modest motel, I wasted no time visiting diesel shops and truck dealerships. With 14 years of experience and a full array of mechanic certifications, I landed a job by day's end. Come Monday, I began my new role servicing boats supplying oil rigs in the Gulf. This marked a promising beginning, yet my ultimate aim was to escape. I needed to distance myself from Linda, her family, and her police officer lover, and I had a strategy in mind. The following day, I visited the Union Hall and initiated the process to obtain my merchant marine license. Whether it was the engine of a container ship, a tanker, or even a cruise liner, it was no different from those I had worked on in the Navy. Within a month, I was prepared to embark on the Nederland Provider, a Dutch container vessel, departing from Bayport, TX, with the outgoing tide. I commenced my journey as an apprentice engineer. Before my departure, I phoned Jimmy Hankins to inform him of my whereabouts. Rotterdam would be my new home port, and I assured him I would update him with my address once settled. Linda had been served with divorce papers a week after my departure. Without hesitation, she signed and returned them promptly. The divorce proceedings would be concluded within 6 months. I eagerly anticipated my time at sea. Chief Raker returned to his office after the Christmas break to find a package waiting on his desk. Upon opening it, he discovered that Frank Dickwad Bowman had been demoted and reassigned to animal control, where he became a dog catcher. 6 months later, he was terminated from his position. Ironically, the only dog he managed to catch was the mayor's daughter's poodle. Following these events, Mary Lou Bowman initiated divorce proceedings and secured a favorable settlement, gaining possession of the house, car, children, and 75% of their joint assets. Additionally, Frank was ordered to pay $1,500 monthly for child support and an extra $1,000 for alimony, a result achieved with the assistance of her adept lawyer, Jimmy Hankins. With his financial situation in ruins, Frank moved in with Linda, only to be swiftly kicked out when she realized his dire straits. Left with nothing, Frank ended up in a small studio apartment, surviving on cheap food, like ramen noodles and canned tuna. Eventually, his failure to meet his support obligations landed him in jail, where his former law enforcement background did little to improve his experience. After departing from Bayport, our journey included 2-day stops in both Charlotte and Baltimore. During these layovers, we utilized the time to inspect the ship's engines and other machinery, as well as perform any necessary maintenance that required the engines to be halted. As the most junior crew member in the engine room, my duty was to remain on watch instead of going ashore. However, I had little desire to leave the ship anyway. Following Baltimore, our next destination was our home port of Rotterdam, where we would enjoy a week of shore leave. In Rotterdam, the engines would undergo thorough inspection and significant maintenance, conducted by a shore-based crew. I was gradually adapting to life at sea, reminiscent of my days in the Navy, albeit without the constant pestering from a chief petty officer over trivial matters. Plus, the food was an improvement. I shared a cabin with Lars Eigelman, a fellow crewman from the engine room hailing from Norway. Most of the technical crew, including those from the engine room, bridge, and communications, were European. The deck crew hailed from Malaysia, the Philippines, or India. Our chef was Swedish, assisted by 2 Nigerians, one of whom acted as steward during passenger voyages. I was the sole American among the crew. During my off-duty hours aboard the ship, which were limited to around 4 hours a day, I mainly engaged in mundane tasks like laundry or reading. The ship boasted a modest library tucked away in a corner of the galley, offering a handful of books in different languages, including a few works by Hemingway. I started with The Sun Also Rises. Looking ahead, I hope to use some of my shore leave to explore Paris and Spain. Monitoring the engine room during my watch wasn't particularly thrilling. As long as everything ran smoothly, it mostly involved standing by and checking instruments. Typically, there were 2 other crew members present, along with either the chief engineer or an assistant chief engineer. Our routine often involved one person monitoring instruments while the others might pass the time playing cribbage or chess, all the while engaging in conversations about home, family, and inevitably, women. The chief engineer, Franz Gruber, hailed from southern Bavaria, Germany, but now resided with his family in Amsterdam. He honed his mechanical skills working on MAN diesels, Mercedes, and BMWs in Germany before transitioning to riverboats on the Rhine and eventually seagoing cargo ships. With 3 decades of experience in the engine rooms of cargo vessels, he was a seasoned professional. Upon our arrival in Rotterdam, it took 12 hours for the containers to be unloaded before the ship was relocated from the terminal to the company docks. We stayed there for a week for a thorough engineering inspection before returning to the terminal to load outgoing containers. As I was about to leave the ship, the chief approached me. "Come, my young friend. You will come home with me. My good wife Gretel will have prepared a feast for us. You will sleep in a large bed tonight and meet my family. Tomorrow we will show you around Amsterdam," he said in his thick German accent. With our sea bags in tow, we headed to the train station, the Hauptbahnhof. From there, we took a train to Amsterdam and then another trolley to Chief Gruber's house. It was a charming 2-story gray stucco home with a red tile roof, nestled in a modest neighborhood of similar residences. Parked in the driveway was a gray Peugeot 301 sedan. We entered through the gate and crossed the meticulously maintained front yard, adorned with gravel, a few flower beds and shrubs in line with the typical European style, lacking grass. I remarked on how lovely the house and garden appeared. "Mark and Evan, my sons, are responsible for maintaining the house while I'm away. It seems they have been diligent with their duties," he commented. For a brief moment, thoughts of my own sons crossed my mind. As we approached the front door, it swung open, revealing Frau Gruber, who warmly welcomed us. She appeared to be around 60 with graying blonde hair neatly braided. Her figure could be described as full and attractive, reminiscent of Rubens' paintings. She wore a modest, knee-length dress, typical of a Dutch housewife, along with knee-length cotton socks and slippers. Upon seeing her husband, she embraced him with the fervor of someone who hadn't seen their partner for weeks at sea. After catching his breath, the chief introduced me to his wife. As I extended my hand for a handshake, she pulled me into a hearty hug, pressing her ample bosom between us. I tried to mask my surprise. Once inside, it was evident that shoes were to be removed and slippers worn indoors. Following the chief's lead, I exchanged my shoes for a pair of slippers he offered and stowed my sea bag as directed. Back in the parlor, the chief handed me a Heineken as we waited for dinner. Despite our attempt to avoid work talk outside the ship, it crept into our conversation, being the common ground we shared. The chief shared stories of his post-war upbringing in Germany, recalling the lingering deprivations of the 50s and how he took to the sea as soon as he could. Dinner consisted of a delightful spread of traditional Dutch dishes, a welcome departure from the onboard meals. Joining us were the Gruber brothers, Mark, aged 19, and Evan, aged 18. Both are enrolled in universities in Amsterdam but reside at home. Mark is pursuing engineering while Evan is focusing on accounting and business computer systems. The Gruber family also includes two daughters, Giselle, aged 26, who is studying classical literature at Cambridge, and Evie, aged 24, who is immersed in classical music studies in Vienna. I discovered that Frau Gruber is a talented musician herself, having played the violin in the symphony orchestra for the past 2 decades. Additionally, she offers private violin lessons, catering to students ranging from 6 to 65 years old. We were also joined by the daughter of their neighbors, Freda. After dinner, Mark and Evan vanished, likely off to engage in typical activities of Dutch teenage boys in Amsterdam. The rest of us gathered in the parlor with a bottle of Riesling and some exquisite cheeses. It came up in conversation that Freda, who joined us, was 30 years old and worked as the headmistress of a nearby nursery school. Since her husband's tragic death in an accident on an oil rig in the North Sea, she had been living with her mother. Freda was an attractive woman, possessing a well-proportioned figure and ample bosom, a trait apparently common among Dutch women, which I found appealing. She kindly offered to show me around Amsterdam the following day. The following day, I encountered Freda, and together we boarded the trolley bound for the city center. She proceeded to guide me through the typical tourist spots: canals, coffee shops offering marijuana, the Rembrandt House Museum, ancient churches, and the red light district. While all of it was quite intriguing, some places more so than others, my primary delight stemmed from the time spent in Freda's company. Strolling along a canal adorned with trees hand in hand was the highlight of the day. Upon returning to her neighborhood via the trolley, she proposed a visit to the local pub for some beer and dinner. We ended up engrossed in conversation for several hours, delving deeper into each other's lives. I escorted her back home and savored a tender goodnight kiss at her doorstep. Upon arriving back at the chief's residence, everyone had retired for the night. The following day, Freda was occupied with work, so I decided to explore on my own. I spent the afternoon at the zoo and then made my way towards the university where I was meeting Mark and Evan. Our plan was to grab a few beers and visit some of their favorite night spots. As I walked, I heard a woman's voice call out, "Hello, sailor. Why don't you come up and see me?" I glanced around and spotted her standing in a window illuminated by a red light. She was dressed in a bra, panties, and a sheer baby doll nightgown. I thought to myself, why not? I had just been paid before leaving the ship and had plenty of euros in my pocket. So I indulged in an hour with a Dutch prostitute. It had been quite some time since I'd been with a woman. Later, I met up with the Gruber brothers, and we had a great time experiencing Amsterdam's nightlife. We enjoyed a few Heinekens and a good meal at a pub before they joined some friends to explore clubs. After a few hours of drinking and dancing with the younger crowd, I felt ready to head back to the chief's house and rest. There were some attractive girls who seemed interested in me, but they were too young. As the group headed to the next club, I caught the trolley back to the house. The following day, I woke up refreshed from a restful night. Frau Gruber prepared a delightful breakfast consisting of eggs, sausages, and robust coffee. The landlord had a list of household tasks, and I assisted in any way possible. Later that evening, Freda joined us for dinner once more. Subsequently, we visited the local pub for a beer and to mingle with some of the locals. Freda was well known by everyone, and my presence was welcomed as I was with her. I escorted her home, and she invited me in for a drink. As we sat on the couch enjoying peach schnapps, I reached a new level of intimacy before we decided it was time to depart. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, she occupied my dreams. The next evening, Freda invited me to her house for dinner. Since her mother had gone to visit her sister, it was just the two of us. Freda cooked a traditional Dutch dish, which, despite its taste, I couldn't really identify. After dinner, we settled down on the couch, sipping schnapps and kissing. This time it led us to her bedroom. Freud was the embodiment of ideal forms. She enthusiastically participated in our intimacy. The next morning, I woke up feeling completely satisfied. We enjoyed a typical Dutch breakfast with strong coffee before returning to bed. We went to the pub for dinner and then went back to Freda's bed. After spending 2 nights with Freda, I needed to recuperate on the ship. 8 weeks later, when we docked in Rotterdam again, Chief Gruber and I took the train back to Amsterdam. This time he went to his house and I went to Freda's. I spent a week in her bed before returning to the sea. For 2 years, I circumnavigated the globe every 8 weeks. It wasn't always as dull as it might seem. There were tumultuous storms and rough seas, hurricanes slashing through the Atlantic, and typhoons raging across the Pacific, keeping the deck crew tirelessly ensuring the safety of the cargo containers. During a cyclone in the Indian Ocean, we tragically lost a container from the towering stack. I heard it held a luxurious Mercedes sedan destined for a Burmese general. Midway across the Atlantic, we experienced a complete power outage, later traced back to contaminated fuel. Swiftly resolving the issue, we resumed our journey in less than 6 hours. Once, we faced a pirate attack off the Arabian coast, but skillfully repelled them with fire hoses before outmaneuvering them. At every port, I purchased postcards to send to my sons. Though uncertain if they ever received them, it was a way for them to trace my travels. 2 years later, Chief Gruber retired and settled into his cozy home in Amsterdam with Frau Gruber. Whenever I returned home to Freda, I had the opportunity to visit them. With Freda's mother relocating to live with her sister, Freda's home essentially became mine too. Despite retiring, Chief Gruber maintained numerous connections within the corporate office and frequently served as a consultant on engineering matters. Meanwhile, I had ascended to the position of chief engineer aboard my ship. Thanks to Chief Gruber's influence, I was offered the role of deputy director of the engineering department, which meant I could be with Freda full-time, no longer needing to spend time at sea. After a typical night of intimacy in Freda's bed, I revealed my plans over breakfast, to reside in Amsterdam permanently and work in the corporate office. I also proposed to Freda. However, I quickly realized she couldn't meet my gaze. It transpired that I wasn't the sole sailor in her life. She had 2 other men sharing her bed during the weeks I was away at sea. Packing my belongings, I bid her farewell and departed. Returning to the corporate world, I declined their offer and resigned. Boarding a train to Bremen, I signed on with another ship that would steer clear of the port of Rotterdam. As the chief engineer aboard the Nordic Queen, a cruise ship navigating the Baltic, Norwegian coast, and Mediterranean, I enjoyed a handsome income with little opportunity to spend it since I never disembarked. In my role as chief engineer, my main workspace was the engineering control room. Despite its location deep within the ship, adjacent to the engine room, it differed greatly from the dirty, greasy engine rooms portrayed in old films. Instead, my control room resembled a sterile environment akin to a hospital operating theater. Additionally, my duties weren't confined to the lower decks. As an officer, I was required to don my white uniform for formal events and greet passengers alongside the captain and other officers. While it might seem that I lacked female companionship after leaving Freda, rules against crew-passenger fraternization didn't entirely restrict opportunities. Occasionally, I could enhance the crew's experience for widows, divorcees, or discreet married women. Moreover, there were always female crew members open to casual encounters. One such crew member was Eva Christensen, a dancer in the entertainment troupe. With her Scandinavian allure featuring long blonde hair and blue eyes, she hailed from Denmark and had been a fixture on cruise ships for 3 years. After performing 2 nightly shows, the dancers would sleep until noon, then convene for lunch in the crew galley before spending the afternoon in rehearsals. During lunch in the crew galley, I caught sight of her. Clad in a pink leotard, tights, and knee-high leg warmers, she had her hair tied up in a bun. Our gazes locked, and I was instantly captivated. Approaching my table, she asked if she could join me. I probably muttered something incomprehensible, but she seated herself nonetheless. After her second performance, she freshened up and changed attire. Past midnight, I awaited her arrival. Offering to take her for a drink, she expressed a strong desire for food, having not eaten since lunch. We headed to the crew lounge, where she indulged in a hearty meal. For the remainder of the cruise, we became inseparable. Although she shared a cabin with another female crew member, I, being an officer, had a cabin to myself. Eva ended up spending more time in my cabin than her own. When her contract concluded, I persuaded the captain to hire Eva as a ship hostess. Following 5 years aboard the Nordic Queen, I was offered the position of Director of Engineering Services at the Port of Miami for Queen Cruise Lines. At that time, QCL had just unveiled their latest vessel, the Caribbean Queen, slated for permanent deployment in Miami. Throughout peak season, it would be accompanied by the Alaskan Queen and the Nordic Queen. Upon departing the ship, Eva accompanied me. We exchanged vows in a quaint Lutheran church situated in Eva's hometown. The entire community, primarily comprised of Eva's family, attended the ceremony. Her relatives, akin to a Viking raiding party, donned suits and ties instead of battle gear. Prior to meeting her mother, I harbored expectations of encountering a Wagnerian warrior queen, adorned in armored breastplate and horned Viking helmet. To my delight, I discovered a more mature version of Eva. My preconceptions may have been influenced by memories of my ex-wife's mother, whom I whimsically dubbed the Dragon Queen. Eva and I spent our honeymoon in the Bahamas for 2 weeks en route to Miami. 9 months later, our daughter came into the world. In my new role, I'm tasked with liaising with captains and chief engineers of our company's cruise ships docking in Miami for replenishment. Each ship sends me an engineering list a day prior to docking, and I ensure they have the necessary parts and service technicians for repairs and maintenance before their departure. Sometimes ships have just a 12-hour turnaround time before they set sail again, and in such cases, repair crews may still be on board during departure. I have a charter jet on standby for flying the repair crew back from the ship's next port if needed. Additionally, I occasionally fly out parts and repair teams to ports to meet ships for urgent repairs. During peak seasons, apart from managing the 3 QCL ships in the Caribbean departing from Miami, we also support other cruise ships in Miami and Fort Lauderdale through contracts. I've even dispatched repair crews for emergency repairs on Carnival or Norwegian Cruise Line ships when required. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. We assist them, and they assist us. It's been more than 12 years since I left Linda and my sons in Vicksburg. I've stayed updated on their lives through Jimmy, my lawyer, ensuring they receive monthly child support payments. Bobby is nearing 20 and attends Old Miss as a pre-med major. Georgie, nearly 15, has a passion for computers and robotics, aspiring to be an engineer. Upon relocating to Miami, I shared my phone number with Bobby through Jimmy, inviting him to reach out. After a few phone conversations, I suggested visiting Bobby at Old Miss, which led to reconnecting with George as well. Our bond began to strengthen. For homecoming weekend, I traveled to Oxford. George informed his mother he'd spend the weekend with Bobby, omitting my presence. Seeing my sons for the first time since Christmas 12 years prior was emotional. They revealed they cherished the postcards I sent them from my travels around the world. My sons informed me that Linda dated some people after our divorce, and eventually she married Ralph Oglesby, who was the high school football coach. However, my boys didn't approve of him. He was quite strict with them. Linda ended up divorcing him after 5 years upon discovering he was having an affair with the girls' basketball coach. Now Linda is the middle school principal. I offered to cover their expenses if they wanted to visit me in Miami. They eagerly accepted the opportunity to come to South Florida for spring break. My condo is located a few blocks away from the beach in South Beach, where college girls in bikinis will be abundant. As I eagerly awaited my son's arrival, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, when I opened the door, I found myself face to face with my ex-wife, Linda. Behind her stood George and Bobby, looking somewhat embarrassed. It was clear that this reunion wasn't their idea. After 12 years of silence, I addressed my ex-wife, who had cheated on me. "Hello, Linda. This is quite an unexpected visit. Please come inside. Allow me to introduce you to my wife, Eva, and our daughter, Anna." Not bad for someone who had no clue.